Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about John Nkengong Ngengasong's play Ancestral Earth. I loved this play. This is exactly the kind of thing that I really, really like reading. So this play, as I read it, is essentially a kind of Oedipus the King adaptation. Oedipus the King by Sophocles. This is a play set in Altentura, which I believe is a fictional location, but it is it's a sort of Ruritania kind of place for West Africa, right? A sort of generic non-place, right? And the play centers around this plague of sorts, right? So we start with Mafua and Nkea coming to the palace of Akumbin, who's the king of Altenura, and Mafua and Nkea are leading this group of women. And what they start with is this litany of problems that the community is facing. So Mafua starts out, here we have arrived at the palace of Altenura, where Akumbin, our king, the descendant of Nkengong, must tell us if this earth on which our feet stand is the same in which our mothers buried our umbilical cords. Nkea says, Mother Earth, she no longer feels the keenness of our hoes. Mafua says, and even when we scratch the soil into timid mounds, the crops laugh at our endeavors. Nkea says, our skies are wide, there are no clouds in the skies, and the sun burns scourgingly on our backs and brings us all the heat in the world. Mafua says, even now my twins are dead in my womb, and the vomit of the living children is thin, their stool is watery like soup cooked by a mad woman. Nkea says, my own children are hungry, they are sick and pale, like the spirit my mother told me in a story ferried wizards across the sky. Mafua says, the streams are sour, they are dry, we do not have water to drink, we can no longer fish the tadpoles and the crabs to pound fufu for our husbands. And here it shifts. So we've got this ecological devastation, right? Drought, the crops are not coming in, the sun is scorching hot, there's no rain, etc., etc. But then we find out there's another element to the problems that the women are facing. Nkea says, and yet our king, man beyond man, and our husbands do not scratch a pimple on their skins, even when the soil continues to mock at our endeavors. And they go from there, and they talk about how the king has not done anything about this, and their husbands, rather than helping in any way, go and get drunk, and then complain that their wives have not prepared them any food. And so that start, right, where you have a group of, in this case, women, but in Sophocles, it's just sort of general citizens of Thebes coming to the king and saying, this natural disaster, this disaster of some kind has befallen us. You, king, are responsible for delivering us from this suffering, right? That is the opening of Oedipus the King, and it's the opening of Ancestral Earth. But Knengasong takes this in a very different direction on a number of different levels. So, alongside the women, we have this other group of Lebu, Ensi, Essia, and Mok. They are the princes of the air, the streams, the soil, and the fire, respectively. So I'm not 100% sure about this, but my sense is that these are sort of deities or avatars of deities might be the right way of putting it, right? So I don't know exactly what it is that they are, whether they are genuinely meant to be sort of gods who are interacting with the mortal world on this very sort of banal day-to-day level, or whether these are, say, shamans or priests or something like this who embody the spirit of these deities. I'm not 100% sure, and it really doesn't make much difference because they nonetheless reflect these particular realms of the natural world. And so each of them has a vested interest in the protection of their sphere, whether that's the air, whether that's the water, whether that's the soil, whatever it is. And they agree with the women that the land has been basically polluted, it has been ravaged, it has not been properly cared for, and what emerges initially, especially the women are not that willing to directly say this. They do direct some of their criticism at Nkengong, who is the king's new wife. And there's a bit of a sort of Marie Antoinette feel to Nkengong initially. The perception of Marie Antoinette, right? Because the idea, the picture that people had of Marie Antoinette prior to the French Revolution, and even during and afterwards, was that she was sort of frivolous, she was draining France's treasury, etc., etc. Akemben seems to spend a lot on Nkengong, but it's not really clear that she demands that. Because later in the play, she does actually cut her expensive necklaces off to go and stand with these women who have brought their case before the king. But Akemben, so Akemben has been working with these red people who I'm not 100% clear if this is a specific reference that I'm not getting because I don't know the cultural background. The only thing I can think that makes some sense is that Knengasong is from what was British Cameroon, and the traditional British military uniforms were red. It's hard to tell what, if any, specific time period Ancestral Earth is supposed to be set in. I was assuming that it was a fairly contemporary context, but it may not be. It may actually be much sort of earlier in the colonial history of Cameroon, because let me see if I can. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to find it. I didn't mark this specifically, but one of the things that Akemben has gotten from these red people is a gun. And so in some sense, that does make sense that this would be at the time that the British were colonizing what became British Cameroon. But other than that, there's nothing really in the play that says it has to be set in a distinct time period. But because Akemben is very openly working with these red people and basically selling them the resources of the land, he says here at one point, and this is actually a point there's two points I want to make about this particular passage. One is the sort of economic colonialism element, because Akyumben is working with these red people. He has sold them what seems to be mineral resource rights as well as timber, and they've taken that away to their country, which has been environmentally devastating for Alatendra. But the other element of this is that this is his response when the women present their case. And this is very un-Oedipus-like, because in Sophocles, when the people come and say, "Oh, King Oedipus, this plague is going on, we need you to get to the bottom of it," Oedipus says, "Yes, I will do that, no matter what the cost." Akyumben, by contrast, says, "Go and till the soil, you lazy women of Alatendra. Your husbands are kind, else they should return you to your fathers and ask the refund of the bride price. I have, with my foreign friends, cut down the forests and opened the land so that you can work freely on the soil, and you come here complaining of hunger and disease instead of working. Go and till the soil before I tell your husbands what to do with you." So, I mean, clearly Akyumben is not on quite the same level of solving this problem that Oedipus is, but he very clearly is, like Oedipus in the Sophocles, the root of this problem. But in this case, it is this economic colonialism in which he has been an active participant, right? The stripping away of trees, the theft of mineral, I would call it theft of mineral resources, the mining of resources under a system of colonialism or economic neo-colonialism for export to the global north. I would call it theft. But all of this stuff, this is the reason why the land is suffering, why there are these ecological catastrophes, right? Because they have fundamentally reshaped the nature of the environment, right? And this is one of the things that we're increasingly becoming aware of today, but really in the latter portion of the 20th century into the 21st century. When you alter an ecosystem or an environment, it is very, very hard to reconstruct it. And so that's the problem that the people of Alatendra face. And ultimately, Akyumben is very, very resistant to accepting any responsibility for this. He's very, very resistant to even dealing with the issue, even accepting that the issue exists. He's a climate change denier on some level. He's much more interested in accusing the priest Alibi of having seduced his wife, Nkengong, even though she directly says to him at one point, he has not done that. None of the stuff that you think he has done has actually occurred. But Akyumben has this sort of Creon from Antigone type single-mindedness, this absolute belief that this has occurred and that his will must be carried out, even though everyone around him says this will be detrimental. However, when there is a collective refusal to brutally torture Alibi, Akyumben finally sort of says, okay, maybe I need to reconsider this. And so he goes into the temple of his ancestors, and the people basically start doing rituals. They sing traditional songs, they pour out libations of salt, palm oil, and nigea, which I don't know what that is, I'm sorry. And this is a very traditional type element of both West African cultures, historically, and ancient Greek culture. So this is one of those cool things where in African drama, particularly West African drama, you see a lot of sort of overlaps between the performance styles, rituals, beliefs of West African cultures and of ancient Greek culture. So they do all of these rituals for these libations, etc., etc. And then there's a sound of the rushing wind. Sound fades, ancestral voice is heard from withal. And the ancestral voice basically says, you all fucked up. The land is suffering because you, Akyumbin, have exploited the resources and sold the resources to the red people. Women of Alatendra, the ancestors have heard your laments, and we sympathize with you, but you also fucked up because you burned too many fires to clear space to plant too much food. You should have been more better stewardship is not the word that I'm looking for, but it's not showing up in my brain. You should have been better stewards of this environment rather than trying to grow more food than you needed. And then the voice of the ancestors sort of takes a swipe at some of the princes, the prince of the soil, etc., for sort of not effectively protecting the environment. So everybody is collectively guilty, which of course is, again, a massive difference from Sophocles' Oedipus, but it's actually a really interesting one, because this idea of collective responsibility is important in many traditional cultures. Indigenous cultures around the world share this sort of aesthetic, or this sort of ethos. West African cultures traditionally share this notion of sort of collective responsibility within a cosmic chain of everyone has their task. And that's very much not the sort of Western ethos, particularly in countries like the US and the UK, which have much more of an individualist ethos. And so finally, what we get, I'm going to read you the last portion. There is a song at the end that I'm not going to read, but I'm going to read you the last portion, because I think this is sort of the upshot ultimately of the play. This is the lesson of the play. So Lebu, the voice of the ancestors fades. Lebu says, we have to make a heavy sacrifice to the gods of the earth. Nkea says, you speak the truth, Prince of Darkness. Eshea says, we shall make a great feast to feed the earth. The earth is hungry. We shall slaughter goats and pigs and chickens and offer to our gods. Then there's a very prolonged sneeze. Eshea has basically a cold because of air pollution. Then Akyumbin says, children of Alatendra, I've put you in agony with my pride, my greed, and foolishness. If a snake bites you, flee at the sight of a millipede. Let us be wise now. Our elders say that you do not feed a goat only on the day you want to take it to the market. The gods of the earth have spoken a lot, and yet we don't understand. It is not many goats and the pigs that you shall sacrifice on one day that matters. We shall feed the earth in a different way. Go now, everyone, with your children. Any child who is old enough to fetch a pipe for an old woman, go with them and bring a seed, a young plant or stem that can be cut and planted, and this day of the week shall henceforth be named Likushia. A day all the sons and daughters of Alatendra shall feed the earth with seed, plant, and stem, and we shall plant them all over the barren lands of Alatendra. Go now. And then the stage directions say, everyone leaves the scene and returns immediately with seed, plant, and stem. They sing and dance around the ancestral shrine, still carrying the seed, plant, and stem, while Alabi throws salt and palm oil and Nijaya on the ancestors' skulls. There's a song, and then led by a Kumbin, everyone plants the seedlings at the foot of the shrine. They sing and dance round, collect the plants, and leave the scene in a procession, song, and dance. And so ultimately, the upshot of the play, the final takeaway, right, is it's not, you can't make up for systemic neglect of the earth, the environment, of the ecosystems with one grand gesture. What is required is a sustained pattern of good stewardship.